Hi everyone, and welcome to a video tutorial for this knit-look cowl that you can see Melba wearing here. So I hope you enjoy it. Please like, share and subscribe, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye. Bye. Okay, so to make this knit-look cowl, you'll need some yarn of your choice, and I'm going for a more chunky look with this pattern, but you know, that's entirely up to you. You could make it with a chunkier yarn than what I'm using. You could use a finer yarn, depending entirely on the look you're going for, how warm you want this to be, you know, whatever your taste is. So I'm going for this 4 to 5 weight acrylic wool blend in this pale blue. Yeah, just match your hook size to your yarn, and I'm using a 5mm hook today, if that will focus. There we go. 5mm hook today. You'll need some scissors to snip your ends, a darning needle to weave in your ends, and or it depends, and it depends if you want to. You can either, we're just making a big rectangle and then we'll join the ends at the end today. So if you want to sew the ends together, that's absolutely fine. You can do so with your darning needle, or you can use your crochet hook to slip stitch them together. It's up to you. I'm going to leave that bit up to you. I prefer to use my hook, but you know, it's entirely up to you. You can also sew. And then a tape measure is optional to take a measurement of your cat's neck circumference. You don't need an exact measurement for this pattern, just a general idea of where your cat sits. I'll include a guide to standard cat sizes in the description box below. And then finally, I think you'll find with this pattern a stitch marker will help you out a lot. It's relatively easy to get a bit lost in this pattern, or at least I find it quite easy to get lost in this ribbed pattern. So, you know, I find a stitch marker is really useful, and you might too. Okay, so here's one I've made previously in a grey, and it's this one is also an acrylic wool blend. You can see this pattern that we'll use gives us knit sort of look. So we've got the ribbed look, double line of ribs, and then a row where it's ribbed on the other side. Okay, 2 rows. It's a 2-row repeat. Well, actually, really a 4-row repeat. So we'll repeat this 4 rows here. Okay. Then yeah, so we'll be making it in a big rectangle, and at the end we join the 2 ends together. Okay, so you'll need to know how to slip knot onto your hook, how to create a chain. You'll need to know how to size the garment according to what, you know, how you want this to fit, how you want it to sit. And then as far as stitches go, you'll need to know how to make a yarn over slip stitch, and I'll show you how to do that. You'll yarn over slip stitch in the back loop only, and then you'll also yarn over slip stitch in the lower front loop, and I'll show you what I mean by that as well as we move along. And then just some simple sewing techniques or slip stitch to join your ends together. So yeah, that's about all. It is definitely beginner friendly, and it's, you know, it's quite repetitive. Once you get started, you can make this up relatively quickly. So let's get started. Okay, so to get started, you'll make a slip knot onto your hook, however you do that. There's lots of different ways, and you know, just a reminder, if you need to brush up on any of these basic techniques, then please check out any of your resources. There's heaps of YouTube videos, beginner series on other channels. I don't run through these basic techniques in any great detail, so if you need any you know, brushing up on any of those techniques, then please do. So we're just going to create a chain. Now the chain will vary. I can't give you a number of chains that you'll make. It'll depend on the size that you want. So the chain length will correspond to the width that you want. Okay, so I've made this one. Let's just measure it for you and tell you how big I've made this, or how wide. I've made this about 15 centimeters wide. Now, how this will work, now you can, you know, you don't have to do this fold over, but how I want it to fit and sit and the look of it, I want it to be a cowl like this, which looks nice and chunky, nice and cozy, and folds over. Now you don't have to do the fold over. If you just want your cowl to be, you know, sort of half this size and sit without folding over, you know, you can totally do this. This width is completely up to you. Just keep in mind a couple of things. You don't want it to be too wide. Because, you know, it'll be a bit bulky, but if you're using finer weight yarn, that might be fine. But you also don't want the base of it to restrict your cat's leg movement at all. So you don't want it to sit too low on the chest. Okay, so yeah, so keep all of those things in mind, and then go ahead and create your chain. Now, like I said, this one's about 15 centimeter, and for a slightly different look, I'm actually going to go slightly smaller for the one I'm making today. So I'm probably going to chain to about 12 centimeters. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it doesn't actually matter how many chains you've got. I'm counting just out of habit, but it actually doesn't matter how many chains you've got. And I'm on a slope, so let's just roll down my slope. So it actually doesn't matter how many chains you've got. So you just go ahead and chain to the width you want for your cowl, and I'll do the same, and I'll meet you in a moment. Okay, so I've got about 12 centimeters there, and you might have a different width to me. You probably do. Yeah, so however wide you want that to be, that's the length of your chain. Okay, so now we're going to chain 1 just as a turning chain, and we're going to work 1 yarn over slip stitch into each of our chains. Now I'm going to recommend that you work into this back loop. So if you look at the front of your chain, you have the V's, and then if you just turn your chain over, you've got these little what I call the third loops at the back here. Okay, just to distinguish them from front and back loops. When we work into the stitches, I call these the third loops, just in the back here. So you want to yarn over, as the name suggests, and you'll skip that first chain, and then in that second chain you'll insert your hook, pull through, and then you'll keep pulling through. Now the trick with this stitch is that you don't pull too tight, okay? So don't pull too tight on the stitch, otherwise yeah, you can get yourself into a little bit of a difficulty with working the stitches if you pull too tight. So insert your hook, pull through, and then just keep pulling through the last 2 loops. Okay, so that's a yarn over slip stitch, and then that's the only stitch that we're using in this pattern. So you'll go ahead and you'll do one of those each in those third loops, and it's harder for me to work slowly. One of those stitches in each of the chains. So just pull through all your loops with a yarn over first. So it's just like a slip stitch, but you're just yarning over first. Okay, so yarn over slip stitch. I think there's other names for this stitch too. I can't remember. I just call it yarn over slip stitch because that describes really well what it is. So go ahead and place one of those stitches in each of your chains, and I'll meet you once I get to the end of my row. And actually, just to jump in here and say, if you don't want to work into these third loops, and sorry, I should have said this at the beginning, if you don't want to work into those third loops, then you don't have to. You can just work into the chain as normal. Now I'm just coming up to the end of my row 1 here, my last yarn over slip stitch there. So that's your row 1, and that doesn't count in our repeat at all. Okay, so what I'm going to recommend that you do here is you take your stitch marker and you just have it handy for the moment. You're going to chain 1 and turn your work, and now we're going to start our 4-row repeat. Oh, I've got one that's a bit loose there. I'll go back and fix this after I've started you off here. Okay, so you've chained 1 and turned. Now you're going to yarn over slip stitch into that first stitch, into both loops of that first stitch. Okay, now why I do that is it just gives the edges a little bit more structure. Okay, so into the first and last stitches you'll always be working into both loops. And then we're going to start off by working into just the back loop only. So the only stitch we're using, as I said, is yarn over slip stitch. So we're going to yarn over slip stitch into the back loop only. So when you look at your stitch, you've got the V again, is similar to what you had in the chain, and you're just going to work into that back loop. Okay, so the loop furthest away from you. Okay, now pause a moment and place your stitch marker in that first stitch. And that's where you'll know that's the beginning of this repeat. Okay, so you'll go ahead and you'll place your yarn over slip stitch, one in each of the back loops of each stitch, and you'll do that all the way to the end. And in the last stitch, so just be careful that you don't miss it, especially in this second row. In your last stitch you'll work through both loops. Okay, so always throughout this whole pattern, first and last stitches in the row, you'll work into both loops. Okay, so go ahead and finish off that row, and we're actually going to do 2 rows of the same as this row here. Okay, so when you get to the end, I'll meet you here just to start you off for the next round, but actually both rows are going to be the same as this row here. So we've got 2 rows like this, and then we're going to do 2 rows slightly differently, and that's going to be our 4-row repeat. Okay, so I'm actually just going to stop here. I'm going to unpick and just go back and fix this little loose loop that I've got here. But I'll meet you when we get down to the end of row 2. Okay, so I'm just at the end of my row 2, and I'm placing my yarn over slip stitch in both loops of that last stitch. So that's row 2. And as I said, for row 3, we're just going to repeat this same row. So working into both loops of that first stitch. So you'll just leave your stitch marker down at that other end. Okay. And then you'll just work through the back loop of each stitch until you get down to the end, and then you'll work through both loops of that last stitch. So go ahead and finish off your row 3, and I'll see you shortly. Okay, I'm down at the end of my row 3, which is actually the second row in this little repeat, and then I'm working into both loops of that last stitch, chaining 1 and turn. And then once again work through both loops of that first stitch in what will be row 3 of your repeat. Okay, so we've got a 4-row repeat. So we're just kind of, the first row doesn't really count. Okay, so just ignore that first row. Okay, so now we're going to work into this lower front loop. Okay, so when you look at your stitches from the top, you've got the V, and underneath you've got this loop here. Let's see if I can show you just a little bit closer. This loop here. So we're working into this loop. Okay, so yarn over and insert your hook into that loop and make your yarn over slip stitch. Okay, so you're going to work into each of those loops all the way along, obviously until the last stitch. All the way along. And what you'll see is you start to get this ribbed effect. Now, why I recommend that you use the stitch marker is that you'll be able to keep track of where you're at. And you might find it easier, you might not need the stitch marker. But what I found when I'm using this pattern is that I tend to lose track of where I'm at with the repeat. So I just put the stitch marker at the beginning of each of the 2-row repeats. Okay, so we've got a total of 4-row repeat, but just so I know when I get back to my stitch marker, I've finished my little section of my 2-row repeat, okay, within that 4-row repeat. So that's what I do. So yeah, I'm going to suggest that you do the same unless you feel really confident and you're totally cool with remembering where you're at. But I find if I put it down, I lose track of where I'm at, and my yarn's just split there when I come back to it. So working all the way down. Now I'll finish off this row off camera and I'll meet you down here. And well, actually I don't even really need to meet you. Just finish off your row, go back working in the same way. So you're working that same little lower front loop. Now the other thing I'll just mention here quickly is that just be careful with this lower front loop, and especially if you're working a bit tightly, it's quite easy to miss one. So if you need to count your stitches, then you can do that and just make sure you've got the right amount at each row. But it can be, if you're working a little bit more tightly than I am, you might find, and hopefully you're working a bit loosely, a bit more loosely than you normally would, you might find that you'll miss one of those little front loops. So just be careful, especially the ones at the end of the rows. Okay, so I've split my yarn again. This is a bit splitty, this yarn. Okay, oops. So yeah, I'm just going to finish off this row here, which I've done, and then I'm going to go back, and that will be my 4th row in that 4-row repeat, or the 2nd row of this little front lower front loop repeat. So yeah, go ahead, continue that, and I'll meet you at the end of this row. Okay, I'm just at the end of my row here. I'll take out that stitch marker and just work into both loops of that last stitch. Sometimes that stitch sort of turns itself towards the back, so you might have to just tilt your work towards you to find that last stitch, and then I'll start this next row. So I'm back starting at row 2. Okay, so I'm back at the beginning of my 4-row repeat. So now we're just going to work into the back loop only. So you can see that you'll just from here on out to complete your project, you'll just be repeating those 4 rows. So this is row 1 of that 4-row repeat, working into the back loop only with your yarn over slip stitches. Then your next row will be the same, working into the back loop only. Your 3rd row will be working into that lower front loop, and then your 4th row will also be working into the lower front loop. So you'll just finish off that, or you'll continue on and finish to the length that you want your rectangle to be, which corresponds to the neck circumference that you want. So you won't work too tight on the neck circumference. You'll obviously want it to fit a little bit looser, but once tight against the neck. But once you get to where you want it to be as far as length, which actually corresponds to the width around your cat's neck and chest, you'll just keep repeating until you reach that length. So it's a nice easy pattern, just that simple 4-row repeat, chain 1 and turn, and then I know because I'm working towards my stitch marker, I'm on the 2nd row of that repeat, and you can see how you start to get this kind of knit look. Okay, and so what we're doing with this back loop only, we're pushing the stitches forward to the front of the work where you're working. So it's just, as you work into whichever loop you're working to, it just kind of pushes the stitches into this ribbed pattern. So yeah, so continue on with that 4-row repeat until, like I said, you reach the length. Now, so I'll tell you how long I went for this one, and this one's actually just a little bit big for Melba. So I'm going to make this new one a little bit smaller. So I went for about 34 centimeters. Okay, and Melba's neck circumference is about, let's say, it's about 24 centimeters. So this is quite big for her, but I didn't want it to sit tightly. I wanted it to sit sort of loosely around her neck. But it's still slightly big. I don't need to go that big. I'm probably going to go to about 28 centimeters for this one. Maybe around the 30 centimeter mark. So that will be the length of my work. I'll keep working up to about 30 centimeters. But your cat might be smaller or larger than Melba, so you'll work to the length that you want to correspond to your cat's size. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. So you'll continue on, and I'm going to meet you when I get to the size that I want. Now, the other thing just to mention is you're going to finish on, now, actually, yeah, I should mention it here. So you'll just, on your last repeat of your 2 rows, it doesn't matter if you don't repeat the whole 4, you know, the 4 repeat when you get to the end of, you know, how long you want this to be, but you won't complete the second row of a 2-row repeat. Hopefully that makes sense. So if you finish off, say for example, you're finishing off on a back loop only, you would just do this 1 row, okay? You wouldn't continue for the second row because down here will be your second row, okay? So where you started will correspond to your second row. So hopefully, again, that makes kind of sense. But it will make more sense when we get to the end. So I'll mention it again once we're finished. And you'll just keep working and see you soon. Okay, so I'm just finishing off my, what's going to be, oops, yarn over first. What's going to be my last row. Now, what I recommend that you do, and this is just optional, but if you want to be able to join the 2 ends quite seamlessly, then I'm going to recommend that you finish off on a half repeat of working into the lower front loop. Okay, so meaning just on your first row of your lower front loop. So I'm not going to, there's my stitch marker, I'm not going to turn and repeat the second row. So yeah, this is just, like I said, it's optional, okay? You can finish pretty much wherever you like if you don't care about joining the 2 ends seamlessly. If you're just going to leave that at the back anyway and it's not going to show, then it doesn't matter. You can just slip stitch at any point to join your ends, okay? And if you didn't work into that 3rd loop in your chain at the beginning, you'll just use your, use the loop that's remaining on the chain to slip stitch and join, okay? But if you're following along with me, finish off on a half repeat of the working into the lower front loop. Okay, so to join these together, and I can take out my stitch marker now. So to join these ends together, so we want to create the appearance of like the appearance of we want to create, what I'm trying to say is we want to try and create the appearance of the pattern, the rest of the pattern as we join it. So just chain 1 and turn. And what we're going to do to join this is we're going to use the lower front loop. Well, actually in the first stitch we'll just use both loops of each, okay? So just insert your hook and we'll just use both loops. Oops. Hang on, let me just get that yarn out the way. We'll use both loops, so just slip stitch into both loops. Okay. And then what we're going to do to kind of create, and this will end up being our inside, and that will end up being our outside, okay? So how we're going to slip stitch this is we're going to use that lower front loop. So insert your hook in there, and then if you didn't work into the 3rd loop in your chain, you'll just use use the second loop on your chain that's exposed. Otherwise, come down and slip stitch into this lower back loop. So not this part of the chain here. You're going to come down and slip stitch into that lower back loop. Okay, so you're going to do that all the way along. So there's the top of my stitches here. So I'm working into this lower front loop to slip stitch and then into the lower back loop. And so what you'll see is once we turn this inside out, or in the right way, you'll see that we've kind of mimicked the pattern somewhat. It's not perfect, but it's closer than if you just kind of end up on a random row. So this just helps to finish this off more seamlessly. Okay, so what you'll do is you'll slip stitch all the way down using those, using whatever stitch, just the corresponding stitches if you're not doing this method, or if you're doing this method into the lower front loop and the lower back loop. Okay, so go ahead and finish off that slip stitch to join your ends, and I'll meet you back once I've finished mine. Okay, so I've slip stitched all the way down, and in the last stitch I've obviously done through both loops, and then I'm just going to yarn over and pull through. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave a longish tail, okay, because this is just my preference and it's perhaps just me being a little bit fussy. But what I'm going to do with this second tail, with this ending tail, is I'm actually going to weave it down through my work, and I'm just going to clean up this little area here. See how it's just a little bit separated. So I'm going to use my ending tail to just clean up that end a little bit, and so I'll just leave a little bit of an extra length of tail. I just like to use my tails to do a little bit of hand sewing cleanup of my work wherever I need to. So that's what I'm going to do. You don't have to do that. That's just my little preference. And then with this starting tail, I'm going to use it to clean up this end a little bit. See how there's just a little gap in there. So I'm going to use my tail ends. So I'll just use the first one. Or use the starting tail. And I'm just going to clean this up just before I turn it in the right way. I just like to join those two little gaps together if I can. Just neaten that up a little bit. But that's just me being a little bit fussy. But since I've gone to all the, since I've gone to the trouble of trying to match up my seamless join, I'm going to make sure this is nice and tidy too. So that looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to weave in my tail end. So you can just go straight to weaving in your tail ends. You don't have to be as fussy as me. So weave it while you've still got it in this way. Just weave it into the back. If I can get that in a little bit further. Let's go down and down. So just weave that in a few times into your work, and just make sure you're not pulling too tight. You can see how I've just kind of closed up that gap. It's not as visible. And then I'll just go down just a little bit more, down into these stitches here. And you can double back if you want to. I'm going to just do that once. And I'm going to just weave in my other tail end. Like I said, I'm going to weave it down in through to this other side so I can clean up this area a little bit. And then otherwise we're finished. So I'll meet you back once I've done that. Okay, so I've just fixed up that other end. So you can see, you can hardly see where those joins are. So I'll just snip off the excess of that last tail end, and your tail ends might have ended up on opposite sides. If you haven't done what I've done, they might have ended up on opposite sides. And so now you'll turn it in the right way, and you'll see that you've kind of got one extra loop in the middle, but it's pretty disguised. That's obviously my seam there, but it's pretty well disguised. So hopefully that's turned out well for you, and if you didn't disguise it, probably doesn't matter. You just keep it at the back, and then there's your finished cowl. So I've made this one clearly quite a lot smaller than my previous one, as you can see, but you can make it any size you like. This one here I'm just going to fold over a little bit, and it's just going to be a little bit tighter, this one. Okay, so yeah, you can make it look and fit and sit however you want it to be. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I really enjoy this knit look, I think, and if you know me a little bit, you might know that I love a chunky knit. So yeah, thanks very much for being here. Please like, share and subscribe, and if you've got time, I would love to see photos of your creations, of your cat wearing his or her cowl. So please send those along to catventurous.community@gmail.com, or you can tag us on social media at catventurous.crochet. So once again, thanks very much for being here, and we hope to see you soon. Bye. Yeah. Bye. Bye. Yeah. Want to get down?